안녕하세요. 지금부터 Fireside Chat with OpenAI를 시작하겠습니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 사회를 맡은 소프트뱅크 벤처스의 조수민입니다. 바쁘신 가운데 시간을 내어 참석해주신 모든 분들께 깊은 감사의 말씀 드립니다. 이번 Fireside Chat with OpenAI 대담은 오픈AI의 CEO 샘 알트만과 회장이자 공동 창업자인 그렉 브록만을 모시고 오픈AI의 미션과 인공지능의 미래에 대해 다양한 이야기를 나누고자 합니다. 이번 대담의 진행자분들도 굉장히 화려한데요. 인공지능 차세대 스타 연구자이신 뉴욕대학교 조경현 교수님과 소프트뱅크 벤처스의 이준표 대표님께서 진행을 맡아주시겠습니다. 대담 이후에는 여러분께서 오픈AI에 궁금해하시는 점들을 모두 물어볼 수 있는 Q&A 시간을 준비하였습니다. 사전 질문을 접수하지 못하신 분들은 QR코드를 통해 많은 참여 부탁드립니다. 그럼 파이어사이드 챗 진행을 맡아주실 소프트뱅크 벤처스 이준표 대표님을 모시겠습니다. 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.
안녕하세요. 오늘 오픈AI 창업자 두 분을 모시고 진행하는 좌담에 와주신 여러분들 진심으로 환영합니다. 행사에 앞서 오늘 저하고 같이 진행을 해주실 한국이 낳은 가장 유명한 AI 석학이자 이 딥러닝 창시자인 얀 리쿤이 천재라고 칭한 저희 뉴욕대 조경현 교수님을 모시도록 하겠습니다. 조 교수님 나오실 때 큰 박수로 맞이해주시기 바랍니다.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요. 앉으시죠. 교수님 만나서 반갑습니다.
예, 반갑습니다. 초대해 주셔서 제가 영광이죠. 네.
사실은 제가 샘 알트만을 저희가 모시게 되면서 제가 저희 바쁘신 조 교수님께 지난주에 전화를 드렸어요. 지지난주구나.
네.
그래서 혹시 좀 와줄 수 있냐고. 근데 흔쾌히 수락을 해주셨고 진심으로 감사드립니다. 일단 저희 샘하고 그렉을 모시기에 앞서서 그래서 AI가 좀 굉장히 핫한데요.
네.
어떻게 AI 석학으로서 요새 AI 트렌드를 좀 어떻게 보시고 예전의 붐하고는 좀 어떻게 다른가요?
지금 같은 트렌드가 몇 번 있었죠. 지난 한 30-40년 동안. 근데 뭔가 좀 다르다고 하면은 지금처럼 이렇게 전문가가 아니고 개발자가 아닌 진짜 모든 사회의 모든 구성원이 이렇게 흥분돼 있고 이 AI라는 거에 대해서 다들 직접 써볼 수 있는 이런 적은 진짜 없었던 것 같습니다. 이렇게 모두가 여기 있는 모든 분들이 다 지금 AI를 쓰고 계시니까요. 네, 이런 때가 있었나요? 없었죠.
네. 그렇다면은 한국의 AI 기술력과 관련 산업 생태계가 해외 시장 대비해 갖고는 어떤 강점이 있다고 보시고 또 어떤 걸 좀 집중해서 개선을 해야 될 거라고 보십니까, 교수님?
네, 사실 AI 기술력이라고 하면은 지금 한국에 있는 많은 기업들, 학교들에서 하고 있는 개발하는 거나 연구하는 게 사실 미국이 됐든 중국이 됐든 유럽이 됐든 그런 데랑 비교해서 전혀 뒤처지지가 않고요. 오히려 학회 같은 데 가면은 실제 참여하는 사람들의 상위에 올라오는 게 언제나 한국 연구자들, 학생들입니다. 근데 이제 좀 부족한 점도 없지 않아 있죠. 일단 지금 오디언스만 둘러봐도 한국은 안타깝게도 너무 한국인만 있다는 그런 큰 단점이 있죠.
네, 감사합니다, 교수님. 이제 행사 시간이 다가왔습니다. 오늘 사실 저희가 청중분들께 질문을 많이 하실 수 있는 기회를 좀 드리려고 그러고 있습니다. 오늘 청중분들께서 좀 의미 있는 시간이 되려면 좀 미리 알고 있거나 참고하면 좋은 포인트가 있을까요?
그러게요. 근데 제가 보기엔 여기 청중분들께서 챗GPT도 이미 다 써보시고 그리고 GPT를 가지고 개발을 하시는 분들도 있고 연구를 하신 분들이 있기 때문에 제가 기술적으로 짚어드릴 건 없을 것 같고요. 다만 한 가지 말씀드리고 싶은 거는 이런 새로운 기술이 나왔을 때는 모두가 흥분을 하고 너무 좋은 점만 보기 마련입니다. 근데 이렇게 샘 알트만도 오고 그렉 브록만도 오고 했으니까 이런 기회가 됐을 때 그들의 얘기를 들으면서 행간에 숨어져 있는 좀 뭔가 그들이 얘기하지 않을 것도 한번 들어볼 수 있는 그런 기회를 가져보도록 하는 게 어떨까 생각이 되네요.
네, 잘 알겠습니다. 이제 본 행사를 시작하려고 합니다. 이번 대담 게스트는 미국인 분들이셔 갖고요. 지금부터는 행사를 영어로 진행을 할 예정이니 양해 부탁드리고 통역이 필요하신 분들은 리시버가 아마 있으실 겁니다. 그거를 착용해 주시면 저희가 동시 통역 서비스를 제공을 해드릴 겁니다. 자, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to kick off conversation with the two amazing guests. They'll share their journey in developing AI for humanity, as well as the innovations that AI has in store to us. So without further ado, let's give a big round of applause to our special guests, Sam Altman and Greg Brookman. Please. Yeah. Hey, Sam. All right. Sam, Greg, I suppose this is your first time in Korea.
Second time for me.
Oh, it's second time for you, and it's first time
It is
for
my
you.
first.
So how much do you know about Korea, and what comes to your mind when you think of Korea? Sam and Greg?
Well, I'll go first. So, 안녕하세요. So I speak a little bit, 조금, of Korean. I really love the culture. I also love the culture of innovation, right? I think that, for me, Korea has always been a mix of the traditional and the new. And I think the degree to which I've seen AI startups be just really taking off here and be just like something that is supported and that people are just excited about. The degree to which people love ChatGPT. Like for me, that's so motivating to see how people are taking the kind of technology that we built but didn't know how it should be applied and how it should sort of roll out into the world and just really see it make a huge impact and everyone just be just so energetic about it.
That's great, Sam.
Look, I've only been here a few hours. I have tremendous respect for Korea. I think that the technology on so many levels, I remember the internet access here and the speed of internet led the rest of the world by so much. Homegrown solutions that don't exist in most places in the world. Really great companies, Samsung, LG, Naver, so many other companies that we think super highly of and are hoping to work closely with. Also the startups building with AI, building on our platform, that's been quite remarkable to watch. Speak is a company that we've been closely involved with that is doing super meaningful work here, and in many other companies that have just been super great. So I think when I think of Korea, like technology and innovation are the first things I think of, and it's very special to be here.
That's great to hear that. I hope you have an incredible time here in Korea. So let's begin our conversation with Sam and Greg. Kyunghyun, would you like to kick off with the first question?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So, of course, just like anyone in AI, I've been following OpenAI from the very beginning. In 2016-17, if I recall correctly, in fact, one of the co-founders, Wojciech Zaremba, was a PhD student at NYU when I joined NYU as a professor. And then what I remember is that in all the years, OpenAI has been focusing on diverse set of topics, not only language model, but robotics, reinforcement learning, and even RL for the gameplay and so on. But somehow, recently, you are hyper-focused on language models, and then you know how to use those language models into a conversational agents and whatnot. So what made you make this kind of pivot? And then have you actually given up on all the other directions that you've pursued earlier on?
Yeah, I think one thing people misunderstand is they look at us and they say, OpenAI is a scale company, right? That we are a language model company, right? That we are, technology this company. And the truth is, I think we are only an AI company, maybe a deep learning company, right? That we really saw this technology was going to work and that we wanted to help steer it in a positive direction, help develop it. And so we've tried many things that failed, right? And you only see the ones that succeed. And one thing I've always believed is that you need to, you can kind of measure our progress towards AGI by the size of our largest project, the number of people involved, the scale of the computational resources. And there just wasn't any way to do this earlier on, right? So we had very diverse bets. We were working in robotics. At some point, actually, we had a great success in robotics with, controlling a robot hand. Super cool video, by the way, if you go look that up. We canceled the project right after. And people at the time were like, that's crazy, right? You just had this like groundbreaking result. Like, why would you cancel the project? But the thing is, that team ended up going to work on Copilot and Codex, our code generation models. And we just realized that digital space is moving so much faster, right? And we realized that we had all these great ideas that we wanted to do in video games, and the thing that worked was scaling up the model, right? So you try all these things, and what really works, like that's what we double down on, and we just keep pushing. And we've seen language models, that's the thing that's working now, but we've got to push it to the edge until the paradigm doesn't work anymore.
So does that mean that the language model might be canceled as well down the road?
I think there's a lot of fruit in the language model domain, and I think that we're still just at the beginning of this paradigm in a lot of ways. But I think that there are places that we'll see that the paradigm that people get used to, it just won't transfer, right? That is the biggest theme in the history of AI, is that it's full of surprises. Every time you think you know something, you scale it up 10x, turns out you knew nothing. And so I think that we as a humanity, as a species, are really exploring this together.
JP?
Okay. I mean, if that was the case, like, what core values and mindset are you know, adopting and developing your technology and product?
Yeah, I think that first of all, on the development side, when we think about how to produce this technology, that we have this attitude of really confronting reality as it is. That it's very tempting to sort of bring in all these notions of, oh, we're going to use this approach, this algorithm, that when we deploy it, it's going to be used in this way. And we found that our track record of those predictions matching reality historically has been quite low. And this is one of the reasons we do deploy, right? And I think that when you're confronted this question of you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know how it'll play out, how do you move past it? And the answer is, well, you try it out at small scale, right? You try it out a little bit. You deploy in an API and you let people sort of integrate into lots of different use cases. And then you see what works, right? And then you start getting so much data, so much information on, we think that this is going to be the risk in this industry, and you learn, right? And you think about, okay, if we put in this mitigation, will it work? And this has been one of the, I think, most important things for ChatGPT is it's increased our rate of internal learning at 10x, 100x. Like, it really cannot be quantified because there's so many people who are applying it in their daily lives, and then we can learn from that. We can improve the model. And so it's this kind of project moving from just OpenAI, a company in Silicon Valley, to really this global project to make an AI that's actually beneficial to everyone. And that, I think, is where the real goal is.
Okay. Can you?
Yeah, that was great. Actually, I can follow up on this one, and then I can ask both of you, Craig and Sam. So along this line of, let's say, philosophy or the core values that you have, one thing I noticed really interesting happened at OpenAI in terms of the publication recently is that there's no author list. It's only OpenAI team. And then if you think about it, and because I'm at NYU, and I've been a professor for already 8 years and so on, and I'm writing all those papers, and I see that the scientists are filled up with their egos. So how did you actually manage to implement this, let's say, culture where individual, ego-full, let's say, scientists all work together to the point that they actually give up their spot on the author list, which is considered as a kind of one of the holy grails in academia. Well, how did you bring that up? Yeah.
Well, one thing we did was try to make working on GPT-4 more prestigious than any other project people could imagine, and we've selected we've built and we've selected people for a culture where I think we've got quite a lot of commitment to the mission of building AGI, and people really do put that first. And I feel very grateful to the people we have for doing that. But I think that we succeed because of that culture, not in spite of it.
I see. Great.
People still have egos. People still care about things. Won't pretend that we've gotten past that. But I think we do have an unusual level of team spirit for our size.
Yeah, I think one contrast between us and other companies is that, in the early days, I would talk to engineers at DeepMind and other places and ask them, why are you interested in building AGI? Like, why are you working on it? And you'd often hear something like, I'm curious. Like, I've always been curious about how the mind works. Like, I want to understand things. But if you ask someone at OpenAI the question, they would say, because I want to have an impact, because I think this is the most important technology. I want to help build it. I want to help steer it. And I think that this focus on, we're not just doing science, like we're doing a lot of science, but that's not where it stops. We're not just doing engineering, we're doing a lot of engineering, but that's not where it stops. It's really the unification of all of these. And only by actually bringing together all these people to actually build a thing that works, that's deployed, that's out there, that you learn from, like that is the only way that we will achieve the kind of impact we signed up for.
I see. So perhaps I can just follow up on that again. I tend to follow up a lot. So now, in order to do that, you had to be able to sell your vision to the people that you recruited, and then making sure that the scientists and engineers all work together in order to build this somewhat elusive AGI. And then I think a lot of people here who are the founders of the startups, they are probably asking the same question. What is the right way to sell this vision that is often very vague? How did you do that?
Yeah, a lot of a lot of failed attempts, I guess. But I think the first thing is you have to believe yourself, right? And I think that the truth is, in this field especially, that you will never have a correct answer. You will only have an answer that becomes more and more accurate over time as you learn from reality, as you learn from developments. And so I think that for a lot of where we started, we had a dream of saying, look, this technology seems like it's going to work, and steering it's going to be the most important thing. Now there's questions of, oh, okay, well, we're talking 50, 100 years, like, you know, and you've got to kind of go through those arguments. But the question of, well, what do? You have that belief. What actions can you take today to actually influence how a technology plays out? Like, that's like a tall order. And so, you know, we had an initial answer that didn't stand the test of time, right? And I think that our initial picture was, well, open source everything. Everyone gets an AI that's super powerful, and then, you know, if any one bad actor exists, everyone else can keep them in check. And the first time that really came into conflict with the actions to take was with GPT-2, where we looked at that. We said, you know, it's not GPT-2, but it's GPT-3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like, can you just blindly say, open source this, everyone gets a super powerful model, and it's all going to be good, and we have no responsibility in that? Like, that's a hard thing to sign up for. And so I think that one thing that was tough for us was that we had this big vision. That did not change, but the tactics did. And so I think separating out those two and being really clear on what is fundamental to who you are, what is the fundamental bet, the fundamental belief that your company is taking, and constantly being willing to change the tactics, constantly updating based on, we learned this thing, we were wrong about this thing, and just being willing to say that you were wrong. Like, that is actually a pretty tall order. It's like a hard thing. It's a hard thing even for me sitting here, right, to say that for years ago. But I think that is the only way to succeed.
I think there are sort of three phases for a startup in terms of recruiting towards recruiting great people. The first one is when nothing's working and all you have is sort of an attack vector and a vision and conviction. And we had very deep conviction, not that we were going to succeed, but that AI was possible. We started the company on the observation that neural networks were working and seemed to be getting better with scale. And as Greg mentioned, we had some tactics that turned out wrong, but we had a very deep level of conviction that success was possible on this trajectory, even though we didn't know any of the details or have any proof or know the shape of what it was going to look like, and that it would be incredibly valuable and important and impactful to the world if you could succeed. At that point, recruiting was quite challenging. The number of people in the world who also believed those things, and more than that, were willing to like leave very well-paid, secure jobs at places like Google or academia was low, and that was, that was like a challenging recruiting phase. But there were, and we're very grateful to them, enough people who kind of believed and took a bet early that went on to do, I think, the best work in the field by bringing engineering and product and research and all of the other stuff we do together, and safety culture, which is its own subset, that we were able to figure out the path towards the GPT series after lots of other attempts and lots of other tactical ideas that we learned in the process was wrong. It's easy to look back, it's easy to write the history backwards, but when you write it forwards, there were like a lot of stumbles in the wilderness for a long time. The second phase is when things are working, but most people don't realize it. And that phase is, I think it's the easiest phase to recruit the best people, because the people you get are smart, very committed, and they see something. And for us, that was sort of once we had figured out scaling laws. So we had miracle number one, which was there's an algorithm that could learn. Miracle number two is it gets predictably better with scale. And I think this was a huge discovery that most of the world didn't notice at the time, but a lot of very brilliant people did. And we were able, at this point, to get a lot of talent together. And then the third phase, which is, I think, paradoxically the most difficult, is the phase we're in now, where everything is working and everyone realizes it. And now we have a lot of people who are just sort of like, before they were interested in crypto, now they're excited about AI. And we've got to continue to find the true believers.
That's great. You're in the third phase, right, at the moment, and then I saw that you've been making a world tour, talking to the heads of the states, and then talking to the various policymakers and decision makers there. Now, my guess is that convincing them about your vision is very different from convincing, let's say, your own employees or the scientists of your vision. So what kind of experience have you had? And then your idea, how has that changed?
I will tell you, I was not So when this trip started, when we started planning it, it was really just a way to like meet our developers and users of ChatGPT. Given the global focus on AI, it's become a little bit more of a diplomatic mission. I wasn't sure how that was going to go. We have met many leaders and heads of state. To a person, everyone has really understood what's happening, the potential tremendous upsides, the need to come together globally to mitigate the downsides as we look out, 10 years from now or whatever. So the conversations have been extremely positive and productive, but also extremely aligned. I think the willingness to work together has really been fantastic.
And I think this is actually a really key point, because the conversation in the AI community for a long time, for the people who have seen this technology coming, is international coordination not possible. Governments will never get it. Like, people will just be thinking about me. Like, what can I do for my company, my constituents, my country, and not be able to rise above. And look, like, there's still early days. We still need to see how this plays out. But I think that the energy and the receptiveness and the thoughtfulness that we've seen has far exceeded what many people expected. And I think that this is really important, right? I think that this is why we deploy. And just the fact that we're seeing all this engagement, that there's all these people here today, I think we would not be able to have that conversation if we didn't take that path.
Okay.
JP, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off over and over. My bad.
We're probably going to ask like one or two more questions,
Please,
and
yes,
then we'll
absolutely.
take the mic to the audience. So, many of our audience today, I think they're really excited, but also worried about the future of AI, and especially potential side effects on jobs, society. What do you think we should do to educate the next generation, living in the time of this uncertainty?
Yep. I think that this is a really important question, right? Like, what skills are going to be important in the future? Like, how will the world change, and how do we all fit into it? And not just survive, but how do we thrive, right? How do we make it so everyone's life is better than if this technology did not exist? And I think that, first of all, with AI, like, it must be possible, right? It's like we're building this technology because it can benefit humans. Now, the change that it's going to bring, I think, is clearly immense, right? Things will change fast, and the details of the technology today may not be the same a year from now. And so the best advice that I have is to really lean into that, right? Become an expert in what exists. But you shouldn't expect that your specific skills of, oh, this is exactly how I do the prompt engineering, or this is the specific piece of technology that I use, you should not expect that to last. That will go away. But this meta skill of seeing something new, of leaning into it and saying, how can I use this? What problems that used to be impossible, I can now solve. Like, where can I have this impact? Just getting good at that meta skill. So just really using the technology, fitting it into your daily life, and figuring out where it can benefit and where it's still limited.
Okay.
That's great.
Well, since we brought up the AI safe team, Sam, I actually watched your Senate hearing. It was one of the most friendly Senate hearings I've ever seen with tech CEOs. And then there, you actually called for the regulation, proactive regulation from the governments or the international organization. But one thing that I couldn't actually hear was anything that is concrete. So for instance, some of these algorithms that you use already in order to build ChatGPT and GPT-4 are used for various, let's say, purposes or the various sectors, including the defense. So some of the optimizers that you guys are using in OpenAI are used to train convolutional neural net that actually are used in the law enforcement or in the defense purposes as well. So do you have any concrete suggestions on how we would be able to regulate even the current use of these AI technologies?
I think there's different countries will regulate the current use in different ways. Regulating use cases is clearly important. Different countries will say, here are the, you're not allowed to use this for defense or military applications. Some countries will say, you can use this for medical advice, but it's got to comply with these regulations. I think at current scale systems, we can look at the uses and have the different agencies we have already address them. What we were talking about at that hearing, and what we've talked about a lot on this trip, is that as these systems get very, very powerful, that does require special concern, and it has global impact. So it also requires global cooperation, and I think that's a new challenge that there's a wonderful conversation that's happening now. And as Greg said, this is why we deploy. I think for people to have time to gradually adapt to this, we need to deploy these systems so that we can make these decisions and kick off these things that'll take a long time to get going. But in the short term, I think thinking about uses and harms and letting the agencies that have jurisdiction over different different markets and different categories, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's very important in this is that in AI, the negative narratives, it's easy to imagine the negatives, right? Those really travel. And the positive stories, they kind of have just, they travel less well. And I think that the thing I've seen is that it's really by people using the technology that they see, wow, I can see how this is actually useful. I can see why people want it. And so I think that one thing that's very important for the short-term, immediate, what's happening right now conversation is you've got to balance, right? You've got to be very calibrated on here's all the things that could happen in a negative sense, and also calibrate with here's the positive, right? How do you balance those two and get those? But then I think you also cannot lose sight of where we're going and this sort of idea of superintelligence, of building systems that are very powerful, that we see coming, right? On the scale of a decade, right? Not today, but something that's coming in the future will require massive computational resources and really be a collective effort of humanity. And I think getting that right will be critical in a way that we have not seen for any previous technology. But I think we have a real ability to do it. And yeah, I think that this whole tour, I think, has really reinforced that fact.
Okay. It seems like we've covered quite a bit of ground in our conversation, but let's move on to the exciting part, the Q&A from the audience. We have received tons of questions from the participants before and during the session. So what we're going to do is our team is going to select the questions, and Professor Cho and I are going to read it out loud for you guys.
All right.
I'll go ahead first. Starting from Kim Min-jun from Away Corporation. 어디 계시죠? Okay. So, do you expect AI to replace the role of religious organizations like church?
I think that it's a good question how all sort of human societies will integrate AI with AI. I would be surprised. I think there will be some organizations that will choose to not integrate it, not sort of change as a result, and that people will be happy about that. There will be some that will embrace it and look very, very different. And we've already seen people building AI pastors, for example, and so the constituents can ask questions to this pastor, that it can cite Bible verses, and it can give advice. And so I think that there's innovation happening within spheres that you may not think about if you're just thinking about it from a tech lens. Fundamentally, AI is, I think, about enhancing human activity, but not just activity, also, I think, human relationships and how we sort of interact with each other. I think it can actually really benefit us on those dimensions, too. So I expect to see some changes, but I also would not be surprised if there's some things that look exactly the same as they did thousands of years ago.
Oh, wait, Greg, I thought it was a yes/no question. Wasn't that a yes/no question? Is it yes or no?
Oh, I think
Really?
I'd say yes. I'd say yes.
Yes?
There's definitely
Okay.
impacts, no question.
Yep. There's another question from the audience. Let me see. Jay Shin from Naver. Where are you? All right. So the question is, it's a very interesting question. What is the most memorable or most miserable failure that OpenAI went through? Let's hear from both of you one at a time. Sam?
I mean, we could talk about this the entire, the whole rest of the afternoon. I think it's very easy to look at OpenAI from the outside as just like this sort of clean, upwards exponential trajectory towards success, but we have been very near to failure very many times. There have been quite memorable moments where people that were very associated with OpenAI early on said you have a 0.0% chance of success, rounded up. And in the early days, we had some ideas, but stuff just wasn't working. And those are hard times. And when kind of you're showing up and not that many people have belief and you have no actual proof or external signs that things are working, and just some sort of slightly promising research projects, and you don't know how you're going to get enough capital or enough talent or enough compute or really have any product strategy or even research strategy. There was a lot of those.
Yeah, and look, we've had projects that felt like they were going to work and were utter failures. So OpenAI Universe from end of 2016. By the way, who's heard of OpenAI Universe? Raise your hand. All right, we got one person in
we
this
appreciate
1,000-person audience. There we go. It tells you how successful that was. But it was a project we felt like it was going to work, and it was just before its time. It was a beautiful idea of having an AI that was given a screen and a keyboard and playing games just like a human would. And the technology just wasn't there, but we had the whole company working on it. We had all these partnerships. We had everything lined up. Everything was great. Just the technology failed on us. I guess maybe we failed the technology. But I've also had the opposite experience of projects that felt doomed and turned out to be wild successes. The API was probably the most quintessential example of that. And that felt like a doomed project from the beginning because we had a technology, GPT-3. We had no idea what to do with it. Right? It was a technology in search of a problem, the opposite of what you're supposed to do for product development or building a startup. But it was kind of our one shot at building something useful. And so we went through the pain. Right? We talked to a bunch of customers. I was driving around town in San Francisco in January, February of 2020, trying to get customers to talk to us. People would take those meetings. If we were 1 month later, no one would have taken any of the meetings. Right? And so we got our early customers, and we launched it, and it ended up being something that has been a platform people have built on top of now. But so sometimes you don't know in the moment if it's going to work or not, and you just got to go through the process and go through the pain.
I see. So here's another spicy question.
The best kind.
Yeah, from Wonbae Kim from Supercat.
김원배님, 슈퍼캣에서 오신.
네. So the question is, looking at successful examples such as Stable Diffusion, it's pretty clear that open source has a strong competitive advantage thanks to its collective intelligence. Do you think or do you have any distinctive feature to compete against the open source approaches at OpenAI?
Well, I don't think about it in quite that way. Like, I actually think that the open source movement innovation is incredible. And I think actually not just protecting that, but fostering that and just sort of, blowing the little bit of smoke and spark into a real flame, I think is actually really important. And that's one thing I think from the conversation about regulation and things that I think we really want to shine through is that like open source innovation, there's like so much potential there, and it's really important to find a way through. So I think that's maybe an answer, right? Is that like we think that like what we see is that there's going to be these open source models and that they will be of limited size and capability, right? Because there's only so many people who can run these giant models, right? That training these giant models, there's a cutoff between a $10 million training run, a $100 million training run, a $1 billion training run, and wherever we're going to go in the future. So what OpenAI does is I think that we really focus on the models that are like the problems that are currently impossible. Our goal is to do one impossible thing a year. And so that is something that will be at the far edge of all resources, of all the engineering talent, all of the research talent, all of the compute power, all of the sort of, the whole supply chain oriented around these models. But we also see these open source models that will cover more breadth. And I think that those two together can then make something that's far more useful. So I think they actually complement each other quite well. And our approach is going to be sometimes we will open source models. We've done it in the past. We will do it in the future. But always trying to say what is currently impossible, and that's what we want to be targeting.
Sam, do you want to add anything?
That was great.
Okay.
Well, another question that I got from the audience. This is from Jihyung Moon Ji-young님's Softly AI. I guess she is a founder of the Softly AI. So her question is, how and what do you define PMF for AI startup, product market fit? Now that you're actually finding it, as far as I can tell, so how are you finding it?
I think it's the same for any other startup. This whole idea of an AI startup will be a very transient phenomenon. When the App Store first launched on the iPhone, I remember there was a period in Silicon Valley from maybe 2008 to 10 at the most, where people would talk about being a mobile startup. And then after that, you never heard someone say they were a mobile startup again, really, because it was just an expected piece of the technology infrastructure to integrate for every company. I think the same thing is going to happen for AI, and it's probably a mistake even now to think of yourself as an AI startup. You have to just be a startup that makes something people love and want to use. And that rule is like the one rule for startups that I believe is most important. It's the make something people want is what it says on the YC t-shirts to remind founders of that. And AI doesn't get you off the hook for it. So product market fit can be defined all kinds of ways. One that I've always used is something so good that people spontaneously tell their friends about it, but there's like hundreds of other good definitions. You certainly know it when you feel it, and it's like, everything is on fire all the time, but in a good way. And that's still what you've got to go for, AI or not.
Now, one important thing, I believe, is that I think that in AI, because things change so fast, we hear from people saying, how do I know that my business won't be just obviated by the next model release? And so I think that here, it's important to think about building value and, for example, in a specific domain, right? Like selling to hospitals, like that requires a lot of expertise. You have to talk to doctors, you have to talk to patients, you have to navigate the regulations, and that's something that doesn't just get obsoleted by a new model. And so I think that sort of really focusing on where's the value to be built. And the harder the problem, the more you have to schlep it, the more that like no one wants to work on that problem domain, like that's probably a good sign that you want to double down. And if you can get product market fit there, that will be something that will last.
So here comes a even trickier and perhaps even spicier question. Now, what we see with the new technology throughout the humanity history is that those new technologies tend to disrupt the job market, labor market. And in fact, Sam, you've been talking about that for some time, and more recently so with the ChatGPT and whatnot, people started to talk about the job displacement and whatnot. Now, the question is, in fact, from the Young-Ha Ko from the Korea Business Angels Association.
Can you raise your hand?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, there
great.
it is. Yes. So here you go. Sam, you've been vocal about universal basic income. How should our society prepare for it, in particular in the context of ChatGPT and advanced AI that is being deployed?
So I think there's going to be economic change for sure, and there will be job market change and displacement for sure also. I think it's not going to be as obvious as it seems to predict. Already we're seeing that these models are doing more to enhance people, make them more productive at existing jobs. But there's so much like surplus demand for labor in so many fields that if you can make computer programmers 2 or 3 times more productive, there's plenty of demand for 2 or 3 times more code. And this is sort of the history of technology. Tools make us more productive, our ability to do more goes up, the expectation for us to do more goes up, and totally new things unlock. There are just totally different kinds of classes of jobs and work that weren't possible before. If you think back to like pre-industrial times, no one would have thought about the job of an AI researcher, and now here we are. That'll happen again. AI is like certainly not the last revolution. There will be more and new kind of jobs, but they're hard to imagine. Right now, these systems, for the most part, are good at doing tasks but not whole jobs. There are some limited exceptions. Over time, they will get better and they will automate more and more. But I really think that human creativity, demand for being fulfilled, doing things for other people, status, all the reasons we work hard and want to create things, want to put something back into society, that's not going anywhere. And I think human ability there will remain important. The thing that I worry about is not our inability to adapt, it is the speed this might all happen. So if you study the history of technological revolutions, seems like roughly in 2 generations, we can adapt to almost any amount of labor market change. But if this all happens in 10 years, that's a new challenge. And in that light, I think UBI is an interesting component of a potential solution. We should study others too, to help people get through that change. And I think if we can eliminate poverty globally, we certainly should do that. The questions about how we think about sharing the benefits of these systems, access to them, governance of them, super important. And there will be a lot of societal discussion in the coming years about how to do that. However, I don't think any of that is sufficient, although it may be necessary. People want to do all those things I was talking about earlier, to express themselves and to give value back. And I think what will really happen is not that none of us have jobs, but we have different kinds of jobs that may not look much like the jobs of today, but that we like much, much more. And when people 100 years from now look back at us now, they'll be like, wow, I can't believe they lived like that. It sounded so awful.
Just one thing to add, by the way, is that for me, the biggest surprise and the biggest theme, and kind of reflected in Sam's answer, is that I think this technology is not going to play out like any of the kind of stereotypical ways that people have been thinking. Right, kind of the conversation 10 years ago about AI would have been, okay, when AI happens, which who knows whenever that will be, which job will it come for first, right? And of course it will be, manual labor, working in a restaurant or something like that, and oh, the last job to go, of course, will be a poet or writing software or something. Like those are clearly the hardest things. And I think the theme of AI is that our expectations about what is hard, what is easy, about what this technology will do, how it will integrate with our society, how people will respond, that we're just poorly calibrated on it. I think that we are, and it's a positive thing, right? I think that like the shape of this is that it actually enhances human creativity in a way that no one really saw coming. It removes a lot of the drudge work, and maybe that will change, and that we will change with it, right? And I think that maybe the most important thing with sort of navigating through AI is to go in it with this extremely open mind and learn from reality, like really not just the positive, right, but the negative, but really leaning into what we're seeing and not just our own preconceptions.
But then I can follow up on that one
Yeah,
a bit.
please.
Yes. So this is a question from the John Lim from the Ministry or the Department of SMB. Okay. So we just talked about the job displacement or the labor market disruption. Now let's talk about the AI, viewing AI from a slightly different perspective. So question is, what do you think of the view that AI is becoming more of a basic utility like water and electricity? And then in that case, the so-called, let's say, foundation model companies running their own application creates any kind of conflict of interest, because we wouldn't want the electricity company to dominate all those, let's say, appliance markets. So what do you think about it? Will OpenAI actually go down this route, or will be a utility company?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting if you look at the history of, for example, electricity, right? GE, General Electric, got really into doing like washing machines and a bunch of things that are not about producing electricity. And was it really because that's what they wanted to do? Or was it because to get adoption of the technology required, you basically needed the people who are experts in it to really show it almost as a marketing technique? And were the washing machines the most important thing that came of electricity? Like, no. So I think that there's something like that going on here. For OpenAI, that our goal is to build AGI, safe AGI, deploy it to benefit all of humanity. That's what we want to do. That's what we're here for. Building an API, building ChatGPT, building these other things, those are mechanisms for us to further our mission. And one of the things that was the hardest when we were deploying the API in the first place was that we'd written up a list of 100 different applications we could build, right? Do something in medicine, right? But then you realize you're going to have to go sell to hospitals, you're going to have to talk to the doctors. Like, that means giving up on the AGI dream. So you can do any one thing, but you give up on the generality. And so I think that the picture for us is we want to stay general. We want to build this technology. We want to build a platform people can build on top of. We want to deploy. We want to learn. We want to get feedback from everyone. But to really integrate this into the economy, to really make it so that we can achieve the upside that's possible, that is not something that we can do. We'll build our washing machines, but man, there's so much more to do with electricity.
Sam, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that are different about this and some things that are similar. Like in electricity, at least the way it works in the US today, you kind of have one choice of who to buy electricity from, and one person that has a water hookup to your home. And I think a lot of the regulation there is important, and you wouldn't want that company maybe doing certain things. With AI models, there will be many models to choose from, and so if you're unhappy with the behavior of us, you go to some other company. And I think in that sense, it looks more like a competitive marketplace. But what Greg said is really important. I think if you look at the history of technology, very often a great platform and a great killer app get built together. And there are some challenges. I don't want to minimize those with us doing both, but like the fact that we did ChatGPT is something that some startups feel like, that was competitive with something I wanted to do. But most startups say, wow, thank you for like pushing AI into the mainstream, and thank you for like making it easier for me to do my job. It really drove the platform, and us having to build that helps us make the platform better. It goes the other direction too. So I think doing these two things together, just to pick one example, Microsoft with Office and Windows, or Unix and C++ for that matter, it's important in ways that are not totally obvious.
Okay. So, sorry, because so much echo, it's hard to understand. But let me take this question regarding copyright. So this question came from Kim Eun-sol Lim from Naver Webtoon. Can you raise your hand, please? Okay. This is an interesting question. Content creators who put in a lot of effort to produce their work often feel a great deal of fear when they see their creations being used as a source for someone's AI. They even show positive reactions towards services that prevent their work from being utilized by AI. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this matter.
Sure. Look, we really think that it's important for us to find a way, not just as OpenAI, but as a society and in a world, for content creators to benefit from this technology, right? If you are, creating great works and that's something that ends up helping AI get better, like somehow there should be compensation to you. It should be something where that you're just better off in this future world than today. And I think that figuring out those mechanisms is going to require experimentation. We plan on experimenting with them, and that this is one of the reasons that we engage so directly with people in the community, and that we talk to a lot of artists, a lot of people who are creating. But I believe fundamentally that AI can, we're starting to see it a little bit, make the act of creating just so much more meaningful, lucrative, and beneficial than it ever has been. And so I think that there's the opportunity there, and that we're really signed up to help achieve it.
Let's see. Since we're on the content, I have another question from the gaming industry. This question came from Leo Kim from NPixel. Can you raise your hand? Okay. So I understand that OpenAI has undertaken various projects in the gaming industry based on its advanced technology, such as forming a Dota 2 AI team. Do you have any plans to continue your endeavor in the gaming industry? And if so, what types of partnership are you particularly interested in exploring?
Yeah, the interesting thing about AI is there's a long history of AI in games. Think about Deep Blue back in the 90s playing chess. And we actually did a bunch of really interesting work in games. 2017, 2018, we worked on the competitive video game Dota 2, and there we ended up building bots that got better and better. And it's a very interesting arc to really even think about how the language model arc is playing out, because there it was like it worked a little bit better. There were all these limitations. Everyone kind of focused on, it can't do this, so we'll never do this. And then 6 months later we did this. And so I think that it's actually interesting to study that history as a little precursor of how does it feel to be in the middle of the exponential. But honestly, we've kind of moved on, right? I think that we will do more in games. I think that they're a really interesting benchmark because they're so well defined. The rules are very clear. But the reason that we've kind of moved on is that they're also so limited, right? That what we want and what we're sort of able to encounter now is the complexity of the real world. But there's still something missing, right? Because if you look at the game AIs, that they had this competence that I thought was so interesting, right? That they're really focused on a goal. And by the way, I think this is something that's also a little scary, right? Something to think about of if you do have a very, very competent AI system that's pursuing a goal, how do you make sure that it's a good goal for humanity, right? And I think that some of these questions are ones that people have been asking for a long time. Games are a good place to study it with systems that are not very capable. But I also think that that language models start to change the equation, because people worry about, if you have to literally specify what an AI is supposed to do, and it just pursues that could be quite bad. But with language models, you have this sort of competence and this sort of common sense, which changes the equation. So I think that games may be an aspect of the future technology development, but we look at it through this lens of how can we get to the next level of reliable, trustworthy, and capable systems through any application domain.
So Greg, since you actually talked about fear, there is a question from the anonymous, let's say, questioner, directed to Sam that is very relevant. I think you're about to say this. So to Sam, I heard you've written SF fiction about positive perspective or the prospect of AGI. Is there anything that is different between your fiction and the real world that we live in now?
It was like extreme fiction that involved leaving the solar system to go colonize the universe. So we're not there yet. But I think anyone who doesn't have both fear and excitement about this technology is not really thinking through all of it. And I think sci-fi has been inspiring to all of us in some ways, totally wrong in others. But in terms of dreaming about where things could go and getting out of the day-to-day grind of the limits of the bugs in our systems and the annoying things they don't do very well, but just taking the very long-term, very zoomed-out perspective, I think it's a great way to explore ideas of the future. And I think it's been an important part of the whole, field, for lack of a better word. Can I say one thing about the games, by
Please.
the way? On the question of games, we are seeing great work with GPT-4 integrated into games in ways that are really surprising us on the upside. We'd be excited to see a lot more of it happen.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question related to investment. Hoon Kim from Beeble AI, where are you? Oh, great. So, what's OpenAI's plan on investing in AI startups in Korea? I know that there's OpenAI Startup Fund, but it funds a very small number of companies. It would be really cool if OpenAI starts something like YC for AI startup, given thousands of AI startups a chance to be funded by OpenAI. What do you think?
You know, YC is really hard to run. It's a lot of huge work, and we always sort of joked, if we had great AI, they could just pick every good startup to fund and give them the advice. That would be very scalable. So maybe someday. The first version of the OpenAI Startup Fund was very small intentionally, so we could learn about how to do that. I think we've learned more now. We plan to expand. We would be delighted to fund more Korean startups. You know, we still have to do it by hand, the old-fashioned way, so it'll still be slow with what we can do. But as the technology matures, I could see us able to truly scale this.
I see. So we've been asking you two to do something for us at OpenAI so far, but here's a question that now we're going to ask you to tell us what we should do. So this is a question from Brandon Cho from Semi5. Yes, there he is.
Semi5, yeah.
Semi5, yes,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
Hi,
so
Brandon.
how much do you think the recent progress in this field has been enabled by the rapid growth of throughput of computing hardware? And what kind of breakthroughs from computing hardware would you like to see for the AI innovation in the future?
Yeah, I think that AI progress is the product, as in the multiplication of many terms, of kind of all of the imaginable inputs, right? That is the compute power, and that's the one that gets the greatest headlines. It's the data, and it's not just quantity; it's the quality. It's about sort of filtering, getting the right sort of just signal from your data set. It's the engineering caliber. It's all of these factors. And they all multiply together. And one of the things that's interesting about a product of terms is if you want to optimize it, you kind of want them to all be about equal. If it's very lopsided, you should really focus on whatever that minimum term is. And for a long time, that's been compute. We're starting to reach the point where it's kind of starting to reach the point that it's hard to build much bigger computers. But it's still possible, right? And I think that actually what's been really interesting is looking at like the custom silicon field. And, we talked to all the players. We've sort of paid attention to that field for a long time. One of the barriers there is actually building great software that's very usable. And so that's actually one place that there's a real opportunity is to build better chips that are sort of optimized for not just today's models, but to really be able to see where the models are going and making it so people can experiment very flexibly and build new architectures. So I think there's actually a lot to be done. Inference hardware is another one where just like part of the reason it's hard for us to give GPT-4 to everyone is because there just isn't enough compute power for the demand. With hardware that I'm sure we'll have 5 years from now, it would be a different story. So I think that there is so much fruit and so much that everyone in this industry can do to contribute to the production of better models, but also the ability to scale them to everyone.
Okay. I think we'll probably have time for 2 or 3 more questions,
Yep.
right? So, this is a question from Hong Gyu-hyuk-nim from Standard Energy. Could you please raise your hand? Okay, there you go. One of the dreams for us is Jarvis, personal AI secretary in our daily life, but energy will be a big problem. Because it has to work even on offline and small mobile battery, which is not enough for smart AI like ChatGPT. Not all personal in the future will have ARC reactor. May I ask the energy consumption of AI will not be the bottleneck in the future? And what are your thoughts around it?
Energy is really important. I think for many use cases, you still will want to call a service in the cloud, even if you're using it locally. We're very, very excited about like a personal super assistant that helps you with everything. But you want that, I think, to have as much intelligence as possible. And even though personal devices will get much more powerful, so will the cloud. And so I think there will be, sort of a hybrid thing where you use on-device stuff for some stuff, but a lot is used in the cloud. In terms of energy, yeah, energy is going to be quite important to the future of AI. At the current scale, we're not consuming huge amounts of energy, but we need huge amounts in the future. We're spending a lot of our time figuring out how to make sure we get that. I think what's going on now with the growth in renewables and what will happen soon with fusion means we can be looking at a lot of energy in the world, and we will need that. And the cheaper that can be, the cheaper AI services will be. Eventually, when we get through this, I think GPU crunch, like energy will be at some point the dominant term in the cost of access to AI.
Yeah, and I think one other interesting point here is this kind of combination of you're going to have some on-device computation, some off in the cloud. I think you'll also see a very interesting interplay between the two, which I think will also be important from a privacy architecture perspective, where you'll have a little AI on your phone that will be like, this thing seems pretty sensitive, let's not send it up to the cloud. And it'll be this other thing we can send up, or it'll subdivide a problem and farm out the hardest part of the problem to the cloud model. And so I think that this hybrid world that we'll move to with edge compute plus cloud, I think will just look quite different from today's inferencing architecture.
Okay, this is probably going to be the last question for today from 김동주님, Uprise 투자자문. Could you? Oh, okay, great. Okay, what do students need to study to survive in the age of artificial intelligence?
And we have a lot of students here.
Yeah,
So, yes.
so please words for them.
It's not a question of survival. You are about to enter, I think, like the greatest golden age of human possibility, technological development, economic growth. It's like, I think it's going to be quite fantastic. To thrive in that world, I think the skills that matter are deep familiarity with the tools and staying abreast of changes and just working with them very closely to develop a great intuition for where things are going and how to make use of it. Resilience, a very ability to learn new things fast and adapt to them and sort of evolve yourself with the technology. But those are the kind of skills that I think are going to be very much rewarded. The one of the predictions I'm most confident about the future is it's just going to happen much faster than the past did. And that, young people are always the best at adapting to that, but now it's going to be extra valuable.
Yep. And just to add to that, I mean, I think I agree with that framework incredibly much. And I think anytime you can choose a skill or a class or an activity to do that you feel aligns with the learning how to adapt to new technology, pick it for sure. But on specifics, I still think that software is actually a really important skill to build. And some of it is, it's not going to be about the mechanics. It's not going to be about the specifics of the programming language. It's not going to be about those details. But fundamentally, getting computers to do what you intend, that's the world we're heading to. And so understanding the low-level details of how it works, that's a starting point. And we do see people who have never coded before who build some of the best AI applications. And so that's actually new, right? That you can actually get computers to do things without having to do it in this contort yourself to the machine. But I think it's still a really important skill. And the more that you can find sort of classes that help you layer your understanding from the low level to this highest level of communicating intent and the sort of philosophy of what it is that you even want from this machine. What do you want it to do? I think all of that will be critical for the future.
Great. I guess we have wrapped up with the final question.
Yep.
And it's been a great time today. I mean, we'll wrap up the 2023 Fires Chat with OpenAI team, Sam and Greg. Thank you so much once again for joining us. All right.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Thank you.